Angelo.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah. Yeah. Just want to say gratitude first and foremost for what you shared, and especially the last one that Margot connected to, and that was a wonderful resonance, with what Margot shared. But just, I'm sorry. What's your name again? I know Rod. I can see his name. You are
Jane.
Jane. Yeah. Sorry, Jane.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, right. I forgot my name.
Yeah. But I could remember your face, very
Sure.
well. But what you said about the structures and not being stuck or trapped into this social structures that the theory was offering was a wonderful reminder to me about how it's supposed to be seen, or it would be easier to see these dimensions that were wonderfully laid through the theory of Raul Quinones Rosadas. And I also I remember what he said about the parts of the diagram in the chart, the parts of the process of having this transition from the EVET to identification or acceptance and resistance, and internalization, redefinition, etc. Goes to integration to be not standalone. I got reminded of that when you were saying that, Jane, about the structures not supposed to be limiting us. And the structures, from that perspective, seem to me like they're just part of a process. They're structures and just parts of a process, a fluid process at the same time. So that identities really evolve and are not supposed to be caught in these structures. And that was a wonderful reminder from Rod about the absolute self. So being very much present while we accept the fact and identify, acknowledge the fact that we also have this social self that has to be there operating while we are connected to this absolute self at the same time. There was just, wonderful resonance that I was experiencing when I was hearing you talk, because after the presentation of Raul, I also got into this deep pondering about how I am, as a person who would like to claim that he's a world citizen, that he's transcended somehow the social identities. But apparently, upon evaluating, the classes and, just the fact that it's termed based on the dominance-based culture or interaction was a bit difficult for me to accept, but despite the fact that it was difficult for me to accept, it was very real. There was a part of me that was affected by my economic status, but by my spirituality, by my preferred way of life, and by my gender. And I had this vivid experience that I shared in our dialogue group of attending a forum wherein, just like Jane, I was like in a reactive mode, and I was reacting from like perhaps another dimension of the social construct, because I was like defensive to what those who might see me as coming from a superior perspective or an inferior perspective, claiming identity that could become a superior perspective. And those who might react were coming from, let's say, a superior position now in society, and could have this feeling of being dominated by an inferior, wanting enough recognition. So it's like what Michael said, our facilitators, like I was involved in mental gymnastics because of this, reaction to what could be the reaction, and so it could be really complicated. And I guess, one would just have to really sometimes try to be liberated, from these social identities, social group identities, like what Rod said about the absolute self, was an important reminder of how we can also be there in dealing perhaps with this complex reactions that one might, because of these complex dimensions, one might have, and I was also reminded with your sharing about how integration as a process also involves constant liberation. We have to liberate ourselves from one layer to another as we integrate to our bigger self, the bigger entity. And and just the fact that the structures, the parts of the theory are there, not to limit us, but perhaps to give a certain direction or just to remind us of the process. Because apparently hierarchies are there. As we were also having this discussion in our group dialogue about how this perception towards dominance is like innate, inherent in human perception, like in the society. And it's difficult for me to accept at first because I saw one local government, like one local settlement that we have in the southern part of the Philippines, having this coexistence between Muslims, Christians, and indigenous. And it seemed for some time there was no domination, there was no dominance-based reaction. But we had this discussion in our group that eventually there could be some type of dominance-based reaction when one starts to look into leadership, and the leadership functioning could lead into that. The perception of somebody being higher than the other or lower than the other. And perhaps it's true, it's innate in human nature, since we are also typically looking for models. We would like better examples. We look up into our parents. And so there's this experience of wanting somebody who was higher, more evolved than us, somebody to emulate. But if the hierarchies can perhaps be seen not as a basis for domination, but as a basis for direction, just as a basis for a certain process again of evolution, then I could live with the social structures in peace. So just thank you for the wonderful reminders. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to say something to that.
Yes, please.
Yeah, it's very, I really very much, oh, now I'm seeing myself, that's strange. The last thing that you said about hierarchies that would serve culture in some way is something that resonates with me a lot, or this is the way how I understand it, because when I read through some of Raoul's articles, there was a question formed in me that, yeah, the fact that we do form some sort or many sorts of social group identities are also having a function. And to me, it's like the function of, let's say, yeah, identification as an orientation, as something that helps me to be, that helps me to function in this complex world. And so that's the part that I find also very interesting as a question for how can we actually co-create, what can we actually do to co-create a culture that serves us more, or like that serves our human development at this point in time. For me is how can we shift to that place where we can build structures or hierarchies that really serve our development. So because it seems it's something very natural and something very necessary, that we cannot all of a sudden identify with like essence or prior unity, but that we have also a need for step-by-step development, for example, or also the chance or the possibility to experience something something such as difference. Yeah, because the interesting thing of one or the difference is also part of oneness, and so this is for me an interesting also relating point to where I am at this very moment, and I can't say that like Raoul's theory is like having that effect on me so much, but definitely goes quite along with what I'm at the moment working on personally. And it's this like developing a sense of a new relationship with my sense of personal boundaries or personal borders. And the question of how can I actually create a relationship to my how do I say that in English? How can I create authentic relationship and staying true to my borders, basically? And I think there's a chance for every one of us, and I experienced that at this very moment in my life, that I have a source of clarity in myself that tells me very clearly, okay, this is a yes, this is a no, this is how it feels like, this is where I have not been yet, and this is where I know where I have been already, maybe. And so that I have a certain information that I get from my sensory body to who I am and where I'm at, basically. So a clarity about borders and boundaries of myself, and how they can serve me in order to relate with you. And I find it very interesting to make a differentiation or to experience differentiation. That there's a certain attitude towards boundary, that a boundary where I, for example, say no, doesn't necessarily mean to basically disconnect from you. And that's a very basic foundation where I see a chance that also in more complex structures of that create in the end oppression or domination and being oppressed, there's a chance that we can actually transform these structures into more positive developmental, I don't know, the thing that makes doors move. What's that in English?
Hinge.
Sorry?
No, but it's another word. It's another word.
I can look it up very quickly. Wait a second.
Pivot.
Yeah, hinge.
Hinge.
Or like a frame joint. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like helping us like these little to step from one stage to the other. From one.
Yeah. No, I get. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something very interesting you're pointing to on it, because basically you're really making the point that if we talk about something like prior unity, very easily the idea is basically that's where we have to be, and everything else we have to leave behind. And what the social identity basically highlights is that maybe this is just really not the case. And maybe, and I think that's also what you're saying, never will be the case. We have to own who we are in all dimensions and have to see how this goes together. But all our social identities, and we haven't talked about our global social identities yet, because we're all basically probably more in our societies, in our nations, but this is true, of course, also on a global scale. How can we come from, as you're saying, prior unity and all what we are otherwise also? Basically, my particular upbringing, my social class, my gender, your gender, how can this be part of the picture, and how can it connect? I think it's a very good point.
And you're pointing to creatively using all that we are.
Yeah.
Which seems, yeah, that's quite an invitation. But it seems like, first of all, we have to understand all that we are.
And I can never ever understand everything.
Well, at least a good, good point.
Yeah, but I see what you mean.
But it also means not skipping over anything. You know, not skipping over the structures that we benefit from, you know, by virtue of race, gender, our nations of national origin, the historical dynamics that are within our countries, and as Thomas was alluding to, also between our countries, and taking responsibility for that, and finding from that ways that we can creatively work together without denying anything. And I think that's I think that those of us from the West who are spiritually inclined and so forth tend too easily to want to skip over the kind of I think depth of reckoning and responsibility. What does it mean to take on, for example, German karma? What does it mean to take on British karma? What does it mean for me to take on American karma? You know, to recognize that who I am in the world and the license and the freedom that I have in the world in many ways has to do with the accident of my birth, you could say, but it is mine. And then how do I bring that into a responsible creative conversation? Even though I can say, well, none of my family, none of my ancestors were slave owners, or, you know, I disagree with this policy, but it's like, how do I own that? You know, how do we own that? And it's not, in many ways, it's not something that we, it's process work. It's not something we're going to be done with, but something that we need to hold in our awareness and see how it changes through the interactions that we have.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, Angela.
Yeah, and Annette, I wanna thank you for the exchange, you know, with Jane also putting in her insights into this concept of not skipping and continuous integration, because it also reminded me of what Wolfgang Rose was speaking about as an evolutionary goal, the national soul identity, and about the importance of integration. And it's like it's dawned on me how amazingly brilliant is the resonance between Raul Rosades' work and Wolfgang Rose's work. You know, with Wolfgang talking about the integration of the national soul to the world soul, and Raul Rosades like identifying, you know, the integration process within the social context, and now how it's very significant also to the integration of oneself with all our social group identities involved. And so that's how the not skipping is really important, because to be able to weave all components of one's personality or identity and our social group identity, there's really a need to recognize all these parts of the process. You know, so yeah, thank you for the again, a wonderful exchange, you know, for the realization.
Thanks, Angelo. And just also to connect both Raul and Wolfgang, because there's a dimension that we haven't talked so much about. Wolfgang was very much talking about nation soul and world soul, and Raul was talking about social structure and social identity. But there is a social structure and a social identity on a global scale. So American identity stands not just next to the Philippine identity. There is a subordinance, a dominance relationship that also has to be part of the picture. So both analysis, what Wolfgang brought and what Raul brought, they are very interlinked. there's something about nation soul and global soul that has to include also we're not just equal, because there is a dominance reality in our global reality, and if we don't look at that, we don't see our social identity on the global scale either.
And then we won't be equal.
Yeah,
exactly. And that's why this is very much important, the dialogue process, because as, like what we're also experiencing here in the Philippines, it's apparent that, for example, we have this dominance-based struggle in the South with Muslims claiming that they lost their lands because of the dominance of the rest of the region, the Visayas and the Luzon region. Luzon is where the seat of the government is. And people are saying, like, for example, that why do we have to give this too much recognition or autonomy to the Muslims when we want to become one nation? Why not just create one nation without autonomy, without that much self-determination? And and my exposure to One World in Dialogue made it really much clearer to me, that there should be prior recognition of an important component of the whole for healing and reconciliation to take place, and so integration could really be facilitated in a manner that how it's supposed to be for the prior unity to be recognized and to be evolving to a bigger reality. Yeah, that's how important it is. So yeah, so the interlinking is just really brilliant. It's something I want to express. So gratitude to all of you.
Thanks, Angela. That's actually really fascinating, because what you're saying is you're realizing that the idea of, well, let's just integrate, or let's all be one nation, in the case of minority groups that have really been sat on by different conquerors, and also within one's own country, that there's a healing process, an acknowledgement, a recognition that needs to happen before that is even possible.
Exactly. Right. It's an important part of the process that can't be skipped, as you said.
Yeah.
And it's cool. And also, this is true on a global scale, that just to say, hey, let's be one humanity.
Yeah.
Is the same subtle or not so subtle the dominant perspective on this, because it ignores a big part of reality where you can't just skip over and say, hey, let's be one to global humanity, without recognizing there's a lot going on this globe.
Because it skips over human realities, and it's the human reality that needs to be brought forward and given space for.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Laura.
Hi, I was thinking, I understand the idea of skipping, but I also feel like I wonder, or I see this other, I see it in this other way where it's almost like those two different sides, whereas on one side, somebody can be really reactive and say, you are an oppressor, I am being oppressed, or I am dominating you and you are less than me. Like both these kinds of social identity framed statements, and then on the other side, I feel like the same, another way, another one-sided perspective is, we are all just one, we are just part of this, underlying matrix and the unity understanding. I think that it's almost like they both clash, like they're both truths, and like we need each other. And I think that what can happen is you can be in that room where one person is seeing just that thing, and I don't know if it's so much that they've skipped over this piece, or this person who's in a more of an identity space has skipped over that. I kind of feel like, I wonder if it's I don't know what happens first, but I definitely see both of those like irrational or not complete understandings of reality. And I also wonder about, like, when we're at younger ages, when we're at different stages of our growth, and we don't understand or don't even have any of those two perspectives and are just in a place of being. And I feel like how unfair, in a way, that I need a book or I need this kind of educational understanding in order to be with other people. Like, I wish that I wish that like, we could be just at a place of, like, vulnerability and openness. And I think we had talked about this with my group, like, in that space of love. I think that, you know, it's like the ideal situation where maybe we're not pushing our perspectives, but we're in a place of, you know, understanding, like, let me be open to what you're saying and learn something. I guess, you know, like evolutionary dialogue.
Mm-hmm. I think, I mean, well, let someone else respond.
Hello?
Yes, hello. Hey, Veronica.
Hi. I just wanted to pick up from what Lara was saying. I can really relate to that. I can see how that clash can exist in the same space. A friend and I just recently went to an open space to discuss the role of Black women in facing oppression. And it was for a good cause. People had the best intention. But similarly, there was a clash in different ways of approaching the problem and or seeing a solution. And whereas, so the friend I went with, she's also on One World of Dialogue. She might be on this call. And we realized there was just there was just a difference in response. And we found that it was quite strange to see people react to oppression using the same divisions and boundaries created by oppression. Mm-hmm. So the idea that I am oppressed, so I must work within these boundaries and within these groups to fight this oppression. But I think the power of intersectionality and looking at these different social group identities is you can realize that you might be on one side on one thing and then on another side for another thing. And in that way, you can start to break away from one identity and realize that actually the system creates oppression and requires there to be an oppressed and a dominator and one who's oppressed. And so to fight oppression, I'm starting to really come to really feel the idea that to fight oppression is to fight all oppression. But when you still work within the context, you're continuing to perpetuate the same oppressive structures by working within them. And but it couldn't seem like a clash, because at the same time you've got a real sense of a real experience of oppression, and that cannot be denied, and the anger is valid and emotion is valid. But that's where I see different things come together from the course. It's only in really trying to tap, even in these difficult moments where you are faced with oppression, to try and tap into this felt prior unity, which then allows you to tap into a greater oppression and a greater struggle in which we are all implicit and victims of at different points in time in different situations. And that's how I've really seen different aspects of this course come together in my mind and really build upon each other, and trying to maintain the prior unity throughout in talking about these differences and then discussing them in different spaces is trying to bring that in, but then understanding that what has been helpful was in that situation, it could have been a little bit disappointing, which it was, to see that kind of reaction and see all the anger, but no kind of movement towards positive action in a way. And feeling like, where are we moving towards? But at the same time, then trying to take a step back and look at it from a position of understanding the other people in the room, and understanding that we are all in our different journeys and at different stages, and not to respond to anger to that either. So it's trying to hold everyone in their different stages of identity development and understanding oppression and understanding this. And I feel very privileged and lucky to be a part of this group, and to have the opportunity to unpack these things and take me on this journey to a new level. But I can't now turn around and see others with I can't, I should hold them with the same kind of understanding, and only try and facilitate and, do what I can to guide them in another direction, the same way that others have guided me. So it's also, it's getting this knowledge and really starting to use it and see things differently, but then also understanding that not to judge others who are at different points as well, and understand that that's where they're at, and that's the space they need, and they will, keep unpacking things, and eventually with the right people and with the right opportunities, they'll get to new spaces and turn that anger into something maybe a bit more positive and unified with other people's struggles. So yeah.
Great, thanks, Veronica.
Thank you.
Rachel, yeah, were you with Veronica?
I was, yes.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, I completely hear what everyone's saying, and I really appreciate what Vera just said then about kind of taking this position of being open and empathetic, I guess, with where people are at. And for me, I think being on this module in particular has made me realize a few potential blind spots in me, because I guess I've had an upbringing that, for one reason or another, has allowed me to have a real sense of prior unity, or existing unity from a very young age. So like I've always approached the world with this kind of feeling of being upset when I felt like people were quite separate, or there was oppression, and it wasn't just systemic, like people just kept up these prejudices and stuff. And somehow I felt separate from that. I felt like, okay, I find it hard to relate to this. So going through the different topics that we've been discussing over the last couple of months, I guess now, has made me really notice that there are these, I guess, prejudices in me about how things should be done. Like that there is in a way, a simple response to all of these things, which is just to notice that we are all the same and that we're all important. And for some reason, I've found it really difficult to relate to people finding that a struggle, looking at kind of world problems and enmities between different nations that have gone on for, decades, if not centuries. I've found that really difficult to take on board as a real thing. Even though I see it happening all around me, I just kind of find it a struggle to embrace. And anyway, so now exploring these different topics in a real way with people, with my colleagues, with working with Jane and Rod and Veronica and Nicole, speaking with you guys, it just feels like I'm shifting my perspective a little bit to embrace a lot of these different places that maybe we're all on, these different paths we're all on at the moment, and that actually I've got my own biases and my own, through Raoul's presentations and materials, just kind of noticing actually, I'm not always aware of my own position within these systems, So, yeah, it's been really interesting. I don't know if I'm making much sense, but just, feeling these subtle shifts in me, and yeah, appreciating that there's a lot to be said for kind of meeting people and wherever they're at, and finding ways to connect on these topics. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. And I think one of the things I value about Raoul's work is that he says, look, we're all on the up or down somewhere. And even if it was only as children that we experienced being subordinate or being, less powerful than, or when we get older, we discover that we don't have the power that we had when we were young. Even if it's only on those dimensions, we all have something that we can relate to in terms of being the one who's not in charge, being the one who's told what to do and who you are and so forth. And I think to realize that our identities are very complex and in that way, and that we all, and to use that as means of connection. I think it's really important.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find also very powerful is to realize this group that we are here, this course, we are going into these topics, and particularly also Raul's topic, not necessarily to solve them, because they're not solvable. Because they're not solvable. It's just to hold them together in this technological process, to basically shed light on a blind spot that for many of us in some ways is blind spot, at least something that we can look more carefully, and then hold something in this dialogical field that we are investigating together in. So in that sense, what we are doing here is also an experiment. How can we, in our all different roles that we have, all different backgrounds, and in recognition of the other side too, that there is something that you can call prior unity, that you also can be aware of. How can this be a dynamic social structure, also in a small group, that holds a very alive dialogue, that is investigating where we can go together globally. So it's in itself an experiment to hold this in our dialogical process without knowing where the outcome is. It's the holding it that really makes the point.
Yeah, and I think that's critical, because it's in the holding it and not turning away from it, not minimizing it, keeping the complexity as it is, and holding it not in an intellectual way, but in a being heart way, that something that the possibility of something different can open up. But as you were saying, I think you said it, Rachel. It's like that when you're in your position, and this is my position in life, and I know that I'm against that or whatever, and you don't create a space where we can recognize that there's something that may be so, and we're also together in something as human beings on this planet. That it's that opening that makes that can give us the next step forward. It's not going to be. It doesn't change. It doesn't solve something, but it allows us to move. And I don't know what will happen from that. But we're in it together then, and that may be the most important thing.
Yeah, because just as a thought experiment, we can imagine how we could come together on this call if we just focus on prior unity, and basically just basically only focus on basically there is no separation. There is no separation. I'm sure there's something very powerful would emerge between us, and there's a deep truth to it. And I think an unbelievable important truth. But only to focus on that would ignore so much of the picture. And on the other hand, if we just would focus on our social identities and have discussion where everybody basically is coming from, where we come from, and then share views, but we come from this point of separation, and do this as a course. I'm sure there's a lot we can discuss and find out too, but to hold this together somehow seems to be the most difficult, but also the most real and alive thing to do. And that's kind of, I don't know where this goes, what we're doing, but I'm deeply convinced it's relevant. It's relevant that people around the globe do this and find kind of settings like this course where we really can do this also in person, not just in theory.
And Denise, in just a second. Rachel, I know when I said Rachel, you probably thought I meant Rachel Varghese. I think you probably thought I meant you. There are two Rachels on the call. I don't know if you want to say something or not. You can, or if you want or not. I think you're not muted on our end. I think you're still muted on yours.
No,
we have you off.
You're not muted on the system. Maybe your phone is muted or your computer. Or why don't we go to Denise in the meantime?
Do you want to see if you can get it turned on, Rachel, and then we'll go to Denise and come back to you? Okay.
So I was just resonating with what you were saying, and actually the last couple of speakers as well, about this. I think that the new unity is going to be different than prior unity. You know, it's we all know the importance of prior unity and its importance to our relationship, not only with ourselves and the universe, you know, with everybody, with the universe, with the cosmos, but this new unity, I think, is really going to be one of embracing difference, you know, where we are all one, but with all different colors and strands and differences, and that it's going to, it seems to me that it's going to take embracing that, not holding it tightly, holding it lightly, embracing it so that we're not avoiding anything, but holding it lightly, and then having a willingness to influence, to be influenced, to be changed, a willingness to be changed, because it's going to come from contact with other people. That as we come into contact with difference, with those who are different, they'll change, I'll influence them, they'll influence me, and without trying to make anybody different than without any effort to change anybody, we'll be changed. We'll be changed, and we will integrate in a way that is not becoming one or the other.
Right.
Yeah, because we don't want a new homogeny.
No.
And I think that's part of what's I find exciting about Wolfgang's work, is he's saying, look, every nation, cultural, civilizational group on the planet has a unique gift to give. Mm-hmm. And it's very, very much after the teachings of Sri Aurobindo, but it's this sense of a world, the world consciousness is going to be multifaceted, and we're not going to find, we don't want to, I mean, in many ways, his work and the work that we're all doing together is trying to push against the way that there's a globalizing culture that is trying to make us all the same, mm-hmm. all consumers, all, you know, sort of all wage earners, all kind of in one system. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is something very different from that we're really trying to bring to life.
Mm-hmm. And I think Raul's work points to that also, because it's in internalization, integration. It's not making things go away. The identity is not going away. It's just becoming open enough to embracing others, to internalizing, integrating, and then being with others, where it's not impinging my relationship with other.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. Go back to Rachel.
Can I just...
Sure, Veronica.
Oh.
No, wait, Rachel? No, still.
No, still no sound, unfortunately. We can see you speak, we just can't hear you speak.
I know, frustrating, really frustrating. Okay, let's keep. You might reboot.
Maybe you might reboot your computer or something like that for a second.
Sometimes that changes the changes the setting. And then we'll go to Veronica. Okay. Okay. All right.
Right.
Okay.
Hey, Veronica.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to really agree with Denise and pick up what she said, which I really like the idea of holding lightly. It's and it's something that me and Jane have been discussing about other things, but it's still really relevant here in the sense that it's one thing to come to these realizations and explore in these groups, but then it's another skill to hold this lightly and reach out and understand that people are in different stages, but also because it's very easy to become impatient. It's very easy to want to see everyone think the same way right now, and it's very hard to understand, why can't you see it the way I see it? It becomes like, it's become so logical that you forgot you even thought differently some other point in time. And I think that's why it's very important to hold these ideas and lessons and thoughts lightly, to allow people to feel like they can come in and explore with us, as opposed to feel like we are imposing an idea onto them, because that's not the way we want people to explore their identity and understand the world. Everyone has their own individual way of coming about it, and steps to get there. And I feel like my way won't be someone else's way, and what really helped me click won't be what the other person finds useful in their journey. So yeah, I really believe it's this idea of holding prior unity lightly, hold our visions lightly, in order to allow for us to not get stuck in our ways. There might be so many things we still haven't seen. It's very easy to feel very comfortable in the way you see things and say, okay, I figured it out, but always be ready to be challenged and open to new ways of seeing something you've seen in one way your whole life. So then you avoid this idea of the superiority in your own position, in your own journey, as opposed to someone else who might be at a different point in that particular aspect.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Veronica. It's interesting, because I think that in what you're talking about, I was thinking about this, and I think this relates to what Annetta was saying, that a hope in what we're doing is that if we can hold this lightly and hold space, then and not take a superior position, which in our own enlightenment or our own development, but really hold that open, that then there's room for people to go through what they need to go through, and there's not a domination in that of a superior view or something. There's a holding space that allows that is different than the whole, because these spaces are very rare. People don't see that there may be a different trajectory through life. But just even in that holding of space, it opens the lid on our identities and on some of the fixed endpoints that people often come to because of the very real experience of oppression or the very blindness of domination.
To add a little bit to that, because I think there is one way to say it, a kind of unbearable balancing act, and the other way to say it is it just takes a lot of creativity of holding lightly but intentionally, because and I think maybe Vero was also referring to we run workshops in our Skip Garden where we all work together with Global Generation, with other people who come into our context and who aren't necessarily coming for, wouldn't be stated. They're not coming for an explicit sense of prior unity or some cosmic sense of self. They're coming for all sorts of reasons. There is a sense and enough kind of center of gravity amongst us in the organization of a depth in that prior unity space, but we want to hold it lightly so that it's open for people to connect with, however is relevant and appropriate for them. but what I find there is something about still being very intentional of keeping that flame alive, but how it's going to, but without being rigid or fixed about it. And I find that, it's a fascinating, challenging, and kind of ongoing dance, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense, but
very much so.
Yeah.
and it feels like then, but by holding the intention, then things open up. There's also a big degree of trust by holding the attention, but not knowing how it's going to be expressed and what's going to happen. Then it feels like actually in very unexpected ways, spaces open up and things, in ways I never could have imagined. But mentally, I often feel, I don't find it a straightforward process, let's say.
Sure.
Well, can I jump in there? I was just going to say that really, obviously, is something that's very true for me working with Jane at Global Generation. But the notion of trust and what that means for all of us, there's something about that being the strongest element of it for me, I guess, in terms of what I was saying before about feeling that it's important to meet people where they're at. I guess what I find it difficult balancing out is trusting that having the patience for these changes to happen, for us to see each other in these ways that bring about positive change, that I personally worry about there not being enough time, if that makes sense. That trust takes a lot of, it takes a lot of trust to know that patience is the right response. And although I am feeling more inclined to attempt that, I think I that's always been the source of concern for me. It's not so much that people must think my way. It's more thinking that, but if people don't think that, we're equal to one another and we're all important, that maybe we will continue to have all these global crises and these breakdowns and everything, really, both in terms of keeping up systems that perpetuate these breakdowns and further entrenching the animosity that exists and creating new animosities and fears. And so it's sort of this really tricky time, I feel, where we have to approach it lightly, as Jane says, and you were saying a few people, but it just feels like, for me, that's where the struggle lies, in kind of believing that time will heal all, and we've just got to work through it all together.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Is there anyone else on the phone who would like to respond? Since we can't see you, raise your hand. You press *6 and you'll be unmuted
If only one phone.
Oh, only one phone? Okay. I thought there were more. There's more than one.
There was before.
Okay.
So if I may, I was just going to...
Rachel Varghese, Rachel Solomon is on the telephone. Oh, okay. You can type something in the chat.
Yeah,
the chat space.
Exactly, and we can read it to the others if you type it to the chat space. Yes.
Okay.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could just respond to, it's really resonating with what Rachel was saying about trust in the process. I think there is a profound level of trust that we have to have with this, knowing that this human and earth experiment may or may not work, depending on if we make things happen, before it's too late. But also, what Jane was saying about this intention made me think that the intention is based on knowing that we're all important, knowing that we each have a piece in this, and that every voice here, every voice that I encounter has a piece in it. And so kind of approaching the other person, knowing that that essential voice is there, that my voice is essential, that their voice is essential. And so it's that coming into contact, that meeting with knowing that space, if we can meet in that space between us, then that essential voice comes out and plays its part in furthering this process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. I think, intention is something I've heard for many years, and clarity of intention, but I think there is more. I just had a glimpse on Friday that there's way more to it than I thought. And it is about trusting that intention, that there is that intention in everybody. We had people from who work in different youth organizations, just a small group. They came and I was running a session on finding silence and stillness. And I just at the beginning in the city, and just at the beginning, I just asked them, why did they come? And I was very open for, they were from very different kinds of organizations, like one was from the Arsenal Football Club and another one was from a bereavement service, just to give you the extremities. But as each one spoke about why they came, I was so moved by, it was this quality of intention that they just, wanted a different space. And I just thought, wow, that is the power in everybody. And I'm not being very clear, but it just made me kind of see it freshly and trust that in everybody, wherever they were coming. And, everyone was coming at it in slightly different ways, but actually there was this, it brought out a commonality that went beneath all of our differences and included our differences.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate what you're saying, Jane, and I think there's also a thread around trust and urgency that was coming out that I think is very, very, that is very important. That the trust has to be very, we're talking about a deep trust in something because things don't seem to be going right on this planet. Let's put it that way. And there's so much conflict and so much happening, and you want something to change. You want it we care about that, and yet so there's an urgency in response, and yet that response has to come from a very profound trust, and not another form of dominating or trying to control things. And that's a very tricky place. And actually, I think this leads into our other Rachel Varghese has typed in a comment, and I'd like to read it to you because it relates to this, to everything we're speaking about. She says, in India, we are now having a serious debate on the idea of nationalism and what it means to be a nationalist and who is anti-national. The discussions and the debates have taken on a violent hue, in the hue of either you are with us or against us. There is the forced movement towards homogeneity, which is also being pushed back. Several young people, particularly students, are rebelling, being reduced to their immediate identity with either being a Muslim or being from a lower caste community or being a woman. There is a refusal by the state to even engage in a conversation or a discussion with the dissenters, which has become extremely frustrating for a lot of people. This refusal fails to recognize what Susan Sontag termed the simultaneity of everything. The fact that I can be a single woman from a minority religious community, having received higher education, puts me in a certain space that makes me different from everyone else around me, and also makes everyone around me also different. The ability to recognize that difference is a good thing is essential. Even in the animal kingdom, we see that there is no single creature that comes from one species, from one habitat, which is exactly the same as another creature from the same species and habitat. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
I like the Sontag reference. I like the fact that, and it's true, we're living in a world with in terms of our identities, in terms of the kinds of conflicts we're in the midst of, that our governments are creating, the simultaneity of everything. We are the simultaneousness of all kinds of different social identities at once, and meeting others who are also that. And how do we, that can give us a place, interestingly enough, that can give us a place of unity to come from, because we're all in that.
And also, Rachel, what you brought in highlights something that we haven't talked so much about. Because we talked about prior unity, we talked about nation soul, and we talked about social identity, but there's also a specific uniqueness to every single one. As we are, I mean, we are made out of all of that, what we are talking about, but there's something that is also irreducible, unique in the way we are. And this is a factor that we have to bring into this dialogue as well, that we are all of that, and there is something that I am just as I am in all of this. Not in a way that I forget about everything and just basically think that I'm this kind of independent, unique agent, because all these other dimensions are part of this. But to see that also when we come together in this conversation of discourse, we are now, I guess, something like 25 people live on this call, and we are something like 70 people all together. We hold something, and every single one of us comes from one's own unique responsibility to hold this together, and to really appreciate this perspective that we are also not reducible to any of these social identities.
Right.
That's a very important point. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in terms of Tom, in terms of that we're all part of a process that is moving forward in time, that uniqueness that we all have links back to what we were saying at the beginning of the call, that we all have something unique to offer and to give to the whole process.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's like no one has the particular mix of social identities that I do, really, and choices in relationship to those. That's true of each of us, and yet, it's not and yet that changes that, but we these dimensions of our social identities can give us a direction in terms of wow, where can who I am and what I'm uniquely made of make a difference? Like, can my taking responsibility for being American, how and what that means in the world, how can that be? That is, I know how needed that is in the world. Can I? It's like that gives me direction, knowing. Being a white woman, what does that gives me both privilege and subordination. How do I use that in order to create openings and spaces that where we can come together, men and women, different races, different nations in different ways. There's a trajectory to our the unique combination of identities And then there's the irreducible self, the individuated self that is also also who we are.
Yeah. So, like in my case, if I really take on my Britishness and the British superiority, then that's going to mean something in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I liked what you were saying about there's these cultural identities, because just to go back to the beginning of the call, I wasn't sure whether it was recorded or anything. The sense of death. I mean, everyone across the globe, every culture, every race, every age is open to dying. So that seems like another area of exploration and creating systems that just don't skip over the idea of just letting that it doesn't matter. The prior unity is such that your just don't matter, and they do matter, and not knowing where this is leading and what this needs from us. That seems to be a unified shared experience, at least at this time, and has been for thousands of years. It's significant, and it's not quite. I mean, it's true for every nation, every culture, all over the world.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Carol.
I'd like to add to this point that my predecessor here was talking about death, that the phase of being old, of age, is also very, very important. Because this is a time when we start realizing a lot of interrelationships in our journey. We have been children, and we have been parents, and we become grandparents, and so on and so forth. So of course we're facing death, and we're facing the fact that our bodies are just becoming more difficult to do what we really want them to do, and so on. And yet it's also a very special time, but it really does also belong to this whole question of identity and social identity, because we are not given, or we are not in positions that we used to be in, and so on and so forth. And we don't have the energy to do a lot of things that we might have been able to do, and yet maybe we have some other qualities, but our societies are not particularly, at large, they are not really good with people getting old. Usually or often, even if we have circles and groups of friends that are. I just wanted to bring that in connection with the whole idea of death and dying.
Thank you, Carol. I think all the Western culture is particularly bad in relationship to aging and it views it in terms of obsolescence, right? Because you become obsolete, you're not necessary, you're not useful. There isn't a tradition or foundation of wisdom, of recognizing the wisdom of the older generations, and that is affecting cultures that still have that tradition of revering elders. The force of westernization is damaging that around the world, and that's something that I think we need to recognize. And that's another area for response, actually.
Annette, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah. It's very beautiful that we reach here, because I'm just making a new link now in my head, and because what you just said about that we have different life phases, basically, that we grow into, live through, and in, let's say, more indigenous cultures, we had practices such as transition practices, such as initiations, that helped us to mark these traditions. And I'm just writing my master's on, where do we find initiation into adulthood nowadays in this year? And I'm very aware that somehow we need to, also this, I'm very aware that it has changed as well. This just as what Denise said, that a new unity is different to prior unity, a new type of initiation is different to what people did before our time. And so I actually made this new link that this way of coming together is actually, or this way of dialoguing and also holding space is actually just another way of facilitating a transition from one state to the other with deep humbleness towards that no one knows where a person will arrive in the end, and that's also a very important new chance, a new possibility in our society, that we can actually hold that space for that openness and just give the individual this very chance to develop into what is really right for this person in this place. And it might be very subtle, and it might be a real, let's say, social transition, such as, okay, I'm declaring myself being a woman or an adult or whatever. And at the same time, it also opens for me, this whole dialogue space opens for me the simultaneous aspect, that it's not just so much about a linear type of transition, but also a non-linear type of transition. And that's so interesting to experience what kind of possibility that holds for us, actually, to experience life.
It's very interesting that you're saying this, Annette, because just when I also was contemplating again, why are we doing this, what we're doing right here? Why are we doing this global dialogue thing? And why are we bringing in all these different perspectives, the prior unity perspective, the nation soul perspective, the social identity? And when I was contemplating it, one answer that came to me is basically just to hold it in order that we can hold a space of dialogue together. And then to the degree that we can hold this space of dialogue together, we can create something between us that has a new social potentiality. I don't know where we can go there, but we don't necessarily do this so that we are specialists on social identity. I mean, prior unity may be different, because I think prior unity is good to really be exposed to this, but at the same time, it's not the whole thing. So, as you say, just holding all of that in order, that may sound too simple, but I think that's true, just to be together. Just to be together in dialogue and see when we are together, and I mean proactively together, not just sitting together, although that may be powerful also, but actively together, having a conversation and see where the creative process goes with this, and create in that new dimension of social realities on this globe. That's why I'm excited about this course.
That's the trust.
That's the trust. And also we have to we are all together in this, because none of us, also not Elizabeth and I, have any idea where we can go here, because it is literally a co-creation. We can come with suggestions and we bring people in and we have a certain leading role in this. But in the end, we are together co-creating something and we don't know where we go.
But I like the idea of it as a transition space also, because dialogue is always a transition space. It's always we start someplace and we want to move somewhere. We want to go. We want to go somewhere together that we don't know and find out together what's possible. But you see, I think there's been a very powerful holding space. I think both those of you who are under 35 and those of us who are over 35, holding for each other a different space of possibility that I think has been very exciting for everyone. And where that can go, we don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. And just to throw another thought in is just, I think this holding this space of dialogue for me is very much similar to what a liminal space is like, you know, where like being and becoming is actually in a way together in a way that is it is not just about being, it's not just about becoming, you know what I mean? And it's meeting in a very delicate way and helping us to actually, yeah, I don't know, there's a spark of development in there, and there's a spark of being there, and this is all intricately interlinked in a mysterious way.
Yeah, great. I think maybe we're a little bit over time, but Kirsten, you had your hand up. If you would you like to make the last comment? And oops, so we're going to undo you. Hang on just a second. Okay, can you begin again? We just unmuted your mic.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can.
Yes. I've been thinking for a while about that we are all in a learning process, and everybody we meet is also part of that. So we are different places, all of us, and therefore it is necessary to be compassionate about everybody, because we are all together part of this prior unity. Also, I could just add to Carol that being an elderly person myself, I think this is a very rich period of my life, because I have learned so much. So I wouldn't be younger, because then I didn't know all that I know now, what life has taught me. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we need to wrap up now. We're a little bit beyond our time. Thank you, everyone, and it's been great to hear from all of you. Yeah, sending you much love. And I think March 13th we have Diane Hamilton, who will be talking about really how do we work with this kind of the emotional and psychological and living complexity of all of what we're talking about. And Diane is an extraordinary facilitator, and I think that she's going to have some really beautiful things to share.
She's exactly hitting where we are right now. She's hitting the question, how do we work this? Because I think we have all these components together, but how to really work this, to hold this multiple perspective, and in coming together in the creative process. And we just had a pre-conversation with her, and I'm very excited what she will bring in here.
Yeah,
great,
very much so.
So thank you all of you.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank
Elizabeth.
you.
Thank you, Tom.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Peace, everyone.
Ciao, bambino.